Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great privilege and an honor to be here in Denmark, the country that initiated the very interesting concept of negative interest rates, which then spread to other parts of Europe. You only have to state it, negative interest rates, to realize that there is something rotten in the kingdom of Europe. It's also a country that has given us Niels Bohr. I was thinking of Niels Bohr in the Eurogroup meetings that I attended. There were about 10 or 11. Every time I was in there, I thought of Niels Bohr. Now, why would I think of a Danish physicist in the Eurogroup? Because I read in his autobiography some years ago a very funny story, which I want to remind you if you have read it or to tell you if you haven't. In it, he recounts a visit that he had at his country home by another physicist who noticed upon entering the house that there was a horseshoe pinned on top of the door. And he turned to Niels and said, "Niels, I can't believe that you think that this will ward off evil spirits." And Niels Bohr turned around and said, "No, of course I don't believe in that, but my housekeeper tells me it works even if you don't believe in it." We have a level of savings which is much higher than the level of investment. So we have a glut of savings, we have excess savings in excess of investment that have reached a level never seen in the history of capitalism. So take Germany, for instance, which actually is a very good example, because Germany is an economy that has weathered the storm of the last 6-7 years reasonably well. It has almost a balanced federal government budget. It has a current account surplus of 8-9%, remarkable net exports. It has very low unemployment, and yet you have a situation where you've got, in Germany as we speak, this is pretty mind-boggling, the lowest level of investment since 1945, and very high levels of savings. Now, why is this a problem? Well, think about it. One of the few things we economists know, there is not much we know. We assume a lot, and we know very little. The one thing, possibly the only thing we know, is that the excess of savings over investment plus the budget surplus of the government sector must necessarily equal the current account surplus. This is an identity. The only reason why we know it is because it's an identity. It's like saying A must equal A. It is that sophisticated. It's really not sophisticated at all. Yeah? So savings minus investment, savings over investment, plus taxation, the tax take of the government minus government expenditure, must equal exports minus imports. Very simple. Yeah? So when savings exceed investment massively, and we try to consolidate because of our fiscal pact, let's say, or a general fear that the money markets are going to crash us if we have a budget deficit, what happens? The right-hand side of the equation, of the identity, must be positive. If excess savings are positive, the budget surplus or deficit tends to zero, we balance the books of the government. That means that we're pushing for a massive current account surplus. And this is indeed what has been happening. If you look at the Eurozone as a whole, even Greece has moved to a current account surplus, or at least it has eliminated a chronic current account deficit. Italy, Spain, Ireland, Germany, everybody's exporting, which of course destabilizes the global economy because we're exporting in deflation. Because my net exports are your net imports. Now, let's say, who cares about the rest of the world? Fine. We care because when there is a natural tendency as a result of this identity and the fiscal pact that we have in the Eurozone for the current account surplus to rise, there is also a natural tendency for the euro to rise, which cancels the attempt of Mario Draghi, the president of the European Central Bank, to create aggregate demand in order to replace the loss of investment by printing 80 billion a month. So this effort, the 80 billion, is annulled. So we have a fiscal policy that effectively cancels out the monetary policy. So that's incongruity number one. Incongruity number two, related to it, and it's very significant, is that we have this unique example in human history where we are printing 80 billion a month, therefore crashing interest rates. This is why the Danish central bank had to push interest rates below zero in order to prevent the revaluation of your currency that would kill off your growth or prospects of growth. And at the same time, you have a policy at the monetary level of printing money which is failing to increase the supply of money. Do you get this? We are printing 80 billion a month, and we are failing to increase the supply of money. The quantity of money in the economy is not rising. Why? Because businesses are not investing the money that Mario Draghi is printing. What do they do with it? If you ask the large corporations that borrow money that has been minted by the European Central Bank, what they do with it, you'll find that they're not investing it. At least they're not investing it in productive capacity. So what do they do instead? Well, they buy back their own shares. But that's not an investment. That creates asset price inflation, share prices go up, but the investment which is low, which is the, if you want, the root of the problem, remember, savings money investment is very high because investment is very low. This is not being cured. And the balance sheet of the central bank expands, and what is the result? Low productivity, low investment, and, this is, I suppose, pertinent to your predicament, increasing volatility. Because when you have ultra-low interest rates, negative interest rates, and you have pension funds that are being crushed by them, while at the same time equities have a tendency to go up because of the money printing and the share buybacks, you have a lethal combination. A lethal combination of volatile fixed income and equities.
And then we're back to productivity and the politics, because you've said that if we don't reconfigure and reunify the political and economic sphere, we could end up in a very bad situation. But how do we actually do that? How do we do that?
Well, come to think about this, when capitalism began in places like Amsterdam and in Britain, democracy was a dirty word. Let me remind you that there is a fundamental difference between liberalism and democracy. Great liberals like John Stuart Mill were against democracy. They believed that the process of electing and having elected representatives is a very inefficient way. He didn't believe in it. It's very late in the piece that we started becoming liberal Democrats. And when did that exactly happen? When power shifted from the political sphere to the economic sphere. Once upon a time, if you were the despot, you had political and economic power. Capitalism created the division between political and economic power. Suddenly it was possible to have economic power if you were a merchant during the commodification drive with the establishment of international trade routes. Suddenly, dirty people, people that the aristocracy didn't want to touch or see, suddenly they acquired economic power. So you have this division between economic and political power. And capitalism made this division even greater. And increasingly, power shifted from the political sphere to the economic sphere, while democracy was developing in the political sphere. It's a bit like the feminization of professions. So when women enter into a profession, it's a time when the profession goes down in status. Similarly, when the masses get access to political power shifts, or power is lost from the political sphere, and it goes to the economic sphere. And there's a great danger. Well, in the European Union, we've already more or less come to the worst possible outcome. Because come to think of it, in the European Union, we have a great paradox. We have democratically elected governments, prime ministers, ministers of finance, and so on and so forth. But all power, all decision-making goes to Brussels, where we send our ministers and prime ministers. But the bodies that make the decision are really not answerable to any sovereign parliament. So, in my experience, we would have the Eurogroup, right? And then we would all go home, and no one would defend the decision of the Eurogroup. I wouldn't, course, because it was imposed upon me. It was terrible for my country. It was terrible for Europe from my perspective. But Dr. Wolfgang Schäuble did not defend it either. He would go to the Bundestag and say, oh, this is a terrible agreement, but it was the best I could do. The Portuguese, the same. The Spaniards, the same. And there is no people who can actually say to the Euro, come here. You made a decision collectively, right? We don't like it, we'll fire you. In Denmark, you can do it. You can say to your government, the decisions you've made have been abysmal. Off you go. But in Europe, the European Union Council, the Eurogroup, ECOFIN, the European Central Bank are outside the realm of democratic politics, even though all the representatives have been elected democratically. This democratic vacuum, there's no... People say that the European Union is not sufficiently democratic. No. It's like being on the moon in your spacesuit, taking your helmet off and thinking, oh, there is an oxygen deficit. There's no oxygen deficit. There is no oxygen.
That's a good point.